Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. They were the warrior monks, the first international bankers, the elite shock troops of the Crusades. For nearly 2 centuries, the Knights Templar held immense power, commanded vast fortunes, and answered to no one but the Pope himself. Their white mantles, emblazoned with a red cross, were a symbol of piety and martial prowess across Europe and the Holy Land. Yet, in a single, coordinated strike on a fateful Friday the 13th, their world was utterly annihilated. How did an order blessed by the Church become its most vilified heretics? What secrets did they truly guard, and how did their vast wealth simply vanish? Join us as we uncover the epic history, the secret dealings, and the brutal downfall of the Knights Templar. The year is 1099. The city of Jerusalem, the jewel of the Holy Land, has fallen. After decades of struggle and a brutal, bloody siege, the armies of the First Crusade have achieved the impossible. The banner of the cross flies over the holy sites, and a new political entity is born, the Crusader states. These fledgling kingdoms, known collectively as Outremer, or the land beyond the sea, were a fragile European outpost in a hostile world. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the counties of Edessa and Tripoli were established as feudal states, governed by the very knights who had conquered them. Yet, this victory was not an end, but the beginning of a new and perilous chapter. The Crusader states were surrounded, isolated, and vastly outnumbered. Their survival depended on a constant influx of men, money, and faith from a Europe thousands of miles away. Central to this survival was the pilgrim. For centuries, Christians had journeyed to the Holy Land, but now, with Jerusalem under Christian control, the floodgates opened. Thousands undertook the arduous journey, seeking salvation, adventure, or simply to walk in the footsteps of Christ. Their journey, however, was fraught with danger. The roads connecting the coastal port of Jaffa to the inland city of Jerusalem were little more than treacherous dirt tracks winding through hills and ravines. These paths were infested with bandits, remnants of defeated armies, and local warlords who saw the unarmed pilgrims as easy prey. Caravans were routinely ambushed, robbed, and massacred. The dream of a safe pilgrimage had turned into a terrifying nightmare. The Frankish lords of Outremer, for all their military prowess, were stretched thin. Their armies were occupied with defending the borders against large-scale invasions from Egyptian and Syrian forces. They simply did not have the manpower to police the roads and protect every small group of travelers. A desperate need arose for a new kind of force, one dedicated not to conquering territory, but to protecting the very people for whom the land was conquered. In this crucible of faith and violence, an environment of constant threat and spiritual urgency, the seeds of a revolutionary idea were about to be sown. In the chaotic aftermath of the First Crusade, with pilgrim roads soaked in blood, 2 knights stepped forward from the ranks of the Frankish nobility. Their names were Hugues de Payens, a veteran crusader from the Champagne region of France, and his close companion, Godfrey de Saint-Omer. They were pious men, deeply moved by the slaughter they witnessed on the road to Jerusalem. They saw a fundamental contradiction. They had conquered the holy city, yet the faithful could not reach it safely. Around the year 1119, they presented a radical proposal to Baldwin II, the King of Jerusalem. They and a small group of like-minded knights would dedicate their lives to God, taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, just like monks. But instead of living in a secluded monastery, their cloister would be the dangerous roads of the Holy Land. Their form of prayer would be the protection of pilgrims. They would be warrior monks. This concept was revolutionary. For centuries, the Church had drawn a sharp line between the man of prayer and the man of war. To combine the two, to create a religious order whose purpose was to wield the sword, was a startling innovation. King Baldwin, however, was a pragmatist. He desperately needed a solution to his pilgrim problem and saw the value in this dedicated, self-funding police force. He accepted their oath and granted them a purpose. Initially, there were only 9 knights in this fledgling brotherhood. Their resources were so meager that they adopted the name the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. Legend holds that Hugues de Payan and Godfrey de Saint-Omer were so poor they had to share a single horse, a powerful image that would later be immortalized on their official seal. Their initial duties were grueling and unglamorous. They patrolled the treacherous pass from Jaffa to Jerusalem, escorting caravans, fighting off bandits, and offering what little aid they could. They were a tiny force against a tide of violence, but their commitment was absolute. They lived a Spartan existence, reliant on donations for their food and equipment. This was not a path to wealth or glory, but one of pious service and extreme personal risk. In these humble, gritty beginnings, there was little to suggest that this small band of 9 poor soldiers would one day become one of the most powerful and influential organizations in the entire world. For any new organization, a physical base of operations is crucial for identity and legitimacy. For the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ, the headquarters they received was more than just a building. It was a symbol of immense power and divine purpose. King Baldwin II, recognizing the potential of this new order, granted them a space in a location of unparalleled prestige, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The knights were given a wing of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Crusaders had converted into a royal palace. This site held profound significance for all 3 Abrahamic faiths. For Christians in the 12th century, it was believed to be the very ground where the legendary Temple of Solomon once stood. To be headquartered at the Templum Salomonis was a public declaration of their sacred mission. This location immediately and irrevocably shaped their identity. The order soon became known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Over time, this cumbersome title was shortened to a name that would echo through history: the Knights Templar. Their new headquarters was not just a symbol, it was a functional military and monastic complex. The halls that once served a palace now housed an armory, a refectory, a chapel for daily prayer, and dormitories for the brother knights. The vast subterranean vaults beneath the platform, known as Solomon's Stables, were repurposed to house their vital war horses. From this strategic nerve center, the Templars could organize their patrols, train new recruits, and manage their growing responsibilities. The royal patronage and the prestigious location acted as a powerful endorsement. It elevated the Templars from a small private militia into a recognized institution at the very heart of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. This association with the Temple of Solomon also planted the seeds of future legends. It fueled speculation that the knights, in excavating their new home, had discovered ancient secrets or holy relics, perhaps even the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail. While their daily work remained the gritty business of protecting pilgrims, their address gave them an aura of mystique and ancient authority that would define their public image and ultimately contribute to both their spectacular rise and their tragic fall. For nearly a decade, the Knights Templar operated in a state of official ambiguity. They had the support of the King of Jerusalem and the local patriarch, but they lacked the one thing they needed to grow beyond a small, regional force: the formal blessing of the Pope. Without papal sanction, they were just a band of armed men with good intentions. To attract the vast resources of recruits and donations from across Europe, they needed to be recognized as a legitimate religious order of the Catholic Church. In 1127, Hugues de Payan, the order's founder and first Grandmaster, embarked on a critical mission to Europe. His goal was to make the case for his warrior monks directly to the highest authorities of Christendom. His greatest asset in this quest was a man who was, at the time, the most influential churchman in Europe, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was a Cistercian abbot, a brilliant theologian, and a charismatic figure whose words could move kings and popes. He was also Hugues de Payan's relative. Bernard became the Templars' fiercest champion. He saw in them the ideal of a new knighthood, one that fought not for personal gain or feudal lords, but for Christ himself. He wrote a powerful treatise, De Laude Novae Militiae, in praise of the new knighthood, which provided the theological justification for a military religious order. He argued that a Templar could kill an enemy of Christ without sin, defining it not as homicide, but as malicide, the killing of evil itself. This powerful endorsement paved the way for the order's official acceptance. The pivotal moment came in January 1129 at the Council of Troyes, held in Hugues de Payan's home region of Champagne. Under the guidance of Bernard of Clairvaux, the Council of Bishops and Abbots formally recognized the Knights Templar. They were granted a specific rule known as the Latin Rule, which laid out the 72 clauses governing their life of prayer, poverty, and military discipline. It dictated their diet, their conduct, and famously granted them the right to wear their iconic white mantle, a symbol of the purity of their new life. The Council of Troyes was the order's official birth certificate. It transformed the Templars from a provincial experiment into an international, papal-sponsored institution. The floodgates opened. Donations of land, castles, and cash poured in from across Europe, and thousands of knights now clamored to join the ranks of this new knighthood. To understand the world of Elizabeth Báthory, one must first grasp the colossal power wielded by the Hungarian aristocracy, a power that, in its own way, rivaled the authority once granted to entire knightly orders by papal decree. While the era of grand papal bulls granting sweeping privileges to groups like the Templars was long past, the spirit of that unchecked authority had not vanished. Instead, it had become localized, embedded within the very fabric of the feudal system in a kingdom perpetually at war. Elizabeth lived in a fractured land, a frontline state in the conflict between the Habsburgs and the Ottoman Empire, and a battleground for the souls of Europe during the Protestant Reformation. The Báthory family, staunchly Calvinist, stood in religious opposition to the Catholic Habsburg monarchy. This religious schism meant that the centralized authority of both the king and the pope was severely weakened. In its place, regional lords became kings unto themselves. This is where the concept of unprecedented powers becomes terrifyingly relevant. High-ranking nobles like Elizabeth Báthory possessed a right known as jus gladii, the right of the sword. This was not merely symbolic, it was the legal authority to pass judgment, inflict punishment, and even carry out executions upon the serfs who lived and worked on their vast estates. Her castle was her courtroom, and her word was law. There was no higher court of appeal for a peasant, no distant king or pope who would intervene on their behalf. This autonomy created isolated pockets of absolute power, far from the prying eyes of any central government. It was within these isolated domains, shielded by legal immunity and fortified walls, that the horrific accusations against Elizabeth would fester and grow for years, perhaps decades. The lack of oversight, combined with her immense wealth and formidable family name, created a perfect storm. She was accountable to no one, a sovereign within her own lands, a reality that made the alleged systematic torture and murder of hundreds of young women not only possible, but perhaps, in the context of the time, tragically inevitable. The legend of the Blood Countess often overshadows the reality of the shrewd and powerful businesswoman. Elizabeth Báthory was not just a countess. She was the head of a financial empire. Her power was not derived solely from her noble bloodline, but was cemented by a vast and complex financial network that spanned across royal Hungary, Transylvania, and even parts of modern-day Slovakia and Poland. Upon her marriage to Ferenc Nadasdy, two of the most powerful and wealthy families in the kingdom were united, creating a formidable economic bloc. Their holdings were immense, encompassing dozens of castles and over 100 villages and towns, each generating a steady stream of revenue from agriculture, tithes, and taxes. But Elizabeth's financial acumen went far beyond simple estate management. She was an active and astute player in the high-stakes world of aristocratic finance. Records show her meticulously overseeing crop yields, managing forestry operations, and negotiating trade deals. More significantly, she operated as a major creditor, lending vast sums of money to other, less prosperous nobles. Her most prominent debtor was none other than the King of Hungary himself, Matthias II. After the death of her husband, the crown owed the Nadasdy Báthory estate an enormous sum, a debt the treasury was in no position to repay. This financial leverage gave Elizabeth immense political influence, but it also made her a dangerous and inconvenient creditor. Her vast wealth was both her greatest shield and her greatest vulnerability. It funded her lavish lifestyle, maintained her private army, and secured her independence. However, it also painted a target on her back, providing a powerful motive for those who wished to see her fall. The conspiracy against her, led by Count György Thurzó, cannot be separated from this economic context. Seizing her lands and canceling the crown's massive debt was a prize too tempting to ignore. While Cháktich Castle would become infamous as Elizabeth's domain, it was also the seat of a brutal, militaristic world shaped by her husband, Ferenc Nadasdy. To understand the atmosphere Elizabeth inhabited, we must look at the life he embodied. A life akin to that of a warrior monk, stripped of spiritual contemplation and filled only with the savage piety of war. Nadasdy, known as the Black Knight of Hungary, was one of the most feared and respected commanders in the wars against the Ottoman Empire. His life was a relentless cycle of brutal campaigns and military discipline. He was a man forged in the crucible of constant, merciless conflict, and he brought that harshness back to his home. His castles were not gentle aristocratic residences. They were preceptories, military command centers on the edge of Christendom. Life within these walls was governed by a rigid, martial code. The sounds were not of courtly music, but of the smithy, the barracks, and the training yard. This was the environment in which Elizabeth managed her estates and raised her children, surrounded by veterans of unspeakable violence and living with the constant threat of an Ottoman raid. Ferencz's long and frequent absences on campaign left Elizabeth as the absolute master of this domain. She was tasked with upholding its severe discipline in his stead. Some historians speculate that the cruelty Ferenc displayed on the battlefield was mirrored by Elizabeth's alleged cruelty within the castle walls. He taught her methods of punishment and discipline, honed from his experience in breaking the wills of enemy soldiers. The line between maintaining order in a harsh frontier fortress and engaging in sadistic cruelty may have become irrevocably blurred. The warrior's code, devoid of mercy, became the law of the household, turning the castle from a home into a fortress of fear. Long before the first accusations were ever whispered, the castles of Elizabeth Báthory were more than homes. They were instruments of power, meticulously designed and fortified by masters of military engineering. The Nadasdy family, through generations of warfare against the Ottomans, had become experts in siegecraft and castle building. Their strongholds, especially Choctich and Sarvar, were prime examples of late medieval defensive architecture, adapted for the age of gunpowder. Perched high on a remote limestone hill, Choctich was a formidable fortress, a jagged crown of stone designed to be impregnable. Its strategic location offered a commanding view of the surrounding landscape, making a surprise attack nearly impossible. Its defenses were layered, a series of outer walls, a dry moat, fortified gatehouses, and a strong central keep. These were not decorative elements. They were cold, calculated features of military design meant to withstand a prolonged siege and crush any attacker. This mastery of fortification, however, had a darker application in the legend of the Blood Countess. The very features designed to keep enemies out were equally effective at keeping secrets in. The thick stone walls that could repel cannonballs could also muffle screams. The isolated towers that served as lookouts could also serve as private chambers for unspeakable acts. The deep, windowless dungeons, designed to hold prisoners of war, were allegedly repurposed into personal torture chambers. The castle's architecture became central to the narrative of her crimes. It provided the seclusion, the security, and the necessary apparatus for the years of alleged abuse to go unnoticed. The fortress that protected the kingdom's border became a prison for the young women lured within its walls. Elizabeth was the master of this domain, a stone kingdom built for war, whose impenetrable defenses provided the perfect, horrifying stage for the atrocities she was accused of committing. To understand the nature of power and the creation of legends, both heroic and monstrous, we must sometimes look to moments where history itself seems to defy belief. We journey back centuries before the age of Báthory, to the sun-scorched earth of the Holy Land in November of 1177. Here, the very concept of a ruler's legacy was forged in blood and faith. The great Sultan of Egypt and Syria, Saladin, was at the height of his power, leading a formidable army of over 26,000 seasoned warriors on a confident march towards the heart of the Crusader kingdom. Jerusalem. Opposing him was a force so small it was deemed insignificant. The kingdom of Jerusalem could muster barely 4,000 men, led not by a fearsome warlord, but by a 16-year-old boy king, Baldwin IV. Compounding this apparent weakness, Baldwin was afflicted with leprosy, a disease that ravaged his body but could not touch his spirit. Believing the main Crusader host was bottled up in the fortress of Ascalon, Saladin allowed his army to spread out, to forage and pillage, a fatal moment of hubris. Seizing the opportunity, Baldwin and his small army, including the formidable Knights Templar, slipped past the Sultan's main force and launched a desperate, shocking ambush at a place called Montgisard. It was a charge born of utter conviction. At the forefront was the boy king himself, his face bandaged, his hands crippled, but his resolve absolute. Before him, the Bishop of Bethlehem held aloft a relic of the true cross, its presence electrifying the Christian soldiers. They smashed into Saladin's unprepared vanguard with the force of an avalanche. The surprise was total, the ensuing panic catastrophic. Saladin's elite Mamluk bodyguard was shattered in the initial charge, and the Sultan himself was forced to flee for his life on a racing camel, his army disintegrating behind him. It was a victory against impossible odds, a triumph so complete that chroniclers on both sides struggled to explain it in anything other than supernatural terms. For the Crusaders, it was a miracle, a sign of God's divine favor upon their leper king. In this single violent afternoon, the legend of Baldwin IV was cemented, not just as a king, but as a saintly warrior. This is how history crafts its icons, through dramatic, unbelievable events that overshadow the nuanced reality of a life, creating a narrative so powerful it endures for centuries. A single victory, no matter how miraculous, cannot sustain a kingdom built on a foundation of internal strife. 10 years after the triumph at Montgisard, the situation in the Crusader states had drastically changed. The unifying presence of Baldwin IV was gone, claimed by his leprosy in 1185. In his place sat King Guy of Lusignan, a man whose weakness was exceeded only by the arrogance of his advisors, chief among them the reckless and belligerent Reynald of Châtillon. In direct violation of a truce with Saladin, Reynald attacked a wealthy Muslim caravan, stealing its goods and imprisoning its people. This was the final provocation. Saladin, enraged, swore a personal oath to kill Reynald with his own hands and began to amass the largest army he had ever commanded. His strategy was one of genius and cruelty. In the blistering summer of 1187, he laid siege to the city of Tiberias, knowing it would act as irresistible bait. Against the sound advice of his most experienced commander, Raymond of Tripoli, King Guy was convinced by Reynald to lead the entire Crusader army on a relief march. It was a death sentence. They marched directly into Saladin's trap, a grueling 18-mile trek across a sun-baked, waterless plateau. All the while, they were relentlessly harassed by Turkish horse archers who set fire to the dry brush, choking the heavily armored knights with smoke and heat. By the time the Crusader army reached the hills overlooking Tiberias, they were broken by thirst and exhaustion. They were trapped, cut off from the Sea of Galilee by Saladin's forces, who had encircled them near a pair of extinct volcanic peaks known as the Horns of Hattin. The battle the next day was not a contest. It was a slaughter. The Crusader army, delirious with thirst and utterly demoralized, was systematically annihilated. The kingdom's holiest relic, the True Cross, was captured. King Guy was taken prisoner, and Saladin fulfilled his oath, personally beheading Reynald of Chatillon in his tent. The catastrophic defeat at Hattin was the death knell for the First Kingdom of Jerusalem, a stark lesson in how the hubris and folly of a few powerful individuals can lead to the utter destruction of a nation, leaving a legacy of ruin. The fallout from the horns of Hattin was swift and devastating. With the Crusader army destroyed and its leadership either dead or in chains, the Kingdom of Jerusalem lay defenseless. Saladin did not hesitate. In the weeks that followed his victory, his forces swept through the land, capturing one vital stronghold after another. Acre, Sidon, Beirut, Ascalon, the great coastal cities that were the lifeblood of the Crusader presence, fell like dominoes. By September of 1187, only one prize remained: the city of Jerusalem itself. The defense of the Holy City fell to Balian of Ibelline, one of the few high-ranking nobles who had managed to escape the slaughter at Hattin. He found a city gripped by panic, filled with refugees and possessing only a handful of knights to defend its extensive walls. He faced Saladin's vast, victorious army, which soon surrounded the city and began a relentless siege. The situation was hopeless. After several days of fierce fighting, with Saladin's miners beginning to breach the walls, Balian knew the city would fall. He went to parley with the Sultan, prepared for the worst. The precedent was grim. When the First Crusade had captured Jerusalem 88 years earlier, they had mercilessly massacred its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. But Balian had one final desperate card to play. He threatened that if Saladin did not offer terms, the defenders would not only fight to the death, but would first destroy the holy sites within the city, including the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, sacred to Islam. Saladin, a man of faith as well as a conqueror, considered the threat. What followed would define his legacy. He agreed to spare the city. There would be no massacre. Instead, he offered terms. The city's Christian inhabitants could ransom their freedom for a modest price. He even allowed many who could not pay to go free, a gesture of clemency that stunned the Christian world. This act of mercy, deliberately contrasted with the brutality of the earlier Crusaders, cemented Saladin's reputation not as a barbarian, but as a chivalrous and magnanimous ruler, even in the eyes of his enemies. It demonstrates how a single, critical decision can shape a historical narrative, creating a legend of enlightened leadership that stands in stark opposition to tales of pure monstrosity. The fall of Jerusalem sent a shockwave across Europe, sparking outrage and a renewed call to arms. This response became the Third Crusade, an epic undertaking led by the three most powerful monarchs in Christendom: Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, Philip II of France, and Richard I of England, known to history as the Lionheart. The crusade was plagued by misfortune. Barbarossa drowned tragically on the journey. But the arrival of Richard the Lionheart in the Holy Land in 1191 electrified the conflict. In Richard, Saladin finally met his match, not just in military prowess, but in sheer force of personality. What followed was one of history's most fascinating rivalries, a brutal war punctuated by moments of extraordinary mutual respect. They were worthy opponents who recognized greatness in one another. When Richard fell ill with a fever, Saladin sent him fresh fruit and snow from the mountains to cool him. When Richard's horse was killed in battle, Saladin sent him 2 fresh mounts as a gift. Yet this chivalry existed alongside shocking brutality. After a grueling 2-year siege, the Crusaders captured the vital port city of Acre. When the ransom for the city's Muslim defenders was not paid quickly enough for his liking, Richard lost his patience. In a cold, calculated act of terror, he ordered the execution of nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners, men, women, and children, in full view of Saladin's army. This massacre stands as a dark stain on his heroic reputation. Yet, on the battlefield, Richard was unparalleled. At the Battle of Arsuf, he demonstrated brilliant tactical discipline, leading his army to a decisive victory over Saladin's forces. He marched to within sight of Jerusalem, but the ultimate prize remained elusive. He knew he could likely capture the city, but he also knew he could not hold it. Ultimately, the two warrior kings fought each other to a standstill. In 1192, they signed a treaty that left Jerusalem in Muslim hands, but guaranteed the safety of unarmed Christian pilgrims wishing to visit the holy sites. Their complex relationship reveals a crucial truth, that the most famous figures in history are rarely the one-dimensional heroes or villains of legend. They are complex, contradictory beings, capable of both great chivalry and terrible cruelty. A vital perspective when examining any figure defined by a fearsome reputation. The year is 1291. The last bastion of the Crusader kingdoms, the magnificent port city of Acre, stands as a final defiant outpost against the might of the Mamluk Sultanate. For 2 centuries, this city had been the vibrant capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a melting pot of cultures, commerce, and military orders. But its time was running out. From the south, a colossal army advanced, led by the Mamluk Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil, a ruler determined to expunge the last traces of the Franks from the Levant. His forces were a terrifying spectacle of medieval military power, numbering in the tens of thousands, accompanied by an arsenal of massive siege engines capable of reducing stone walls to rubble. Inside Acre, the defenders were a fractious coalition of the great military orders: the Knights Templar, the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, alongside Venetian, Pisan, and French contingents. They were outnumbered, but they were also the most seasoned warriors in Christendom. The Templars, under their Grandmaster Guillaume de Beaujeu, were the backbone of the defense, their red crosses a symbol of unwavering resolve. The siege began in April, a relentless storm of fire and stone. The Mamluk trebuchets, some so large they had to be disassembled and shipped from Cairo, pounded the city's ancient walls day and night. The defenders fought back with ferocious courage, launching daring sorties to disrupt the siege works and burn the enemy machines. But for every Mamluk soldier that fell, 10 more seemed to take his place. The end came on May 18th. After weeks of bombardment, the Mamluks breached the outer walls, pouring into the city in an unstoppable tide. A brutal, street-by-street battle ensued. Grandmaster de Beaujeu was mortally wounded while rallying his men, a devastating blow to the city's morale. The remaining Templars retreated to their formidable seaside fortress at the city's edge, a citadel within a city. For 10 more days, they held out, a final hopeless stand. As the Mamluks undermined their last stronghold, the structure collapsed, taking both the last Templar defenders and their attackers with it into a dusty grave. The fall of Acre was not just the loss of a city, it was the shattering of a dream. The Crusader presence in the Holy Land was over. The surviving knights, including the Templars' future Grandmaster, Jacques de Molay, escaped by sea, their destination the island of Cyprus. They were an order born to defend the Holy Land. And now, the Holy Land was lost. The waves that carried the surviving Templars from the smoking ruins of Acre brought them to the shores of Cyprus. The island, purchased by the order decades earlier before being sold to Guy de Lusignan, now became their de facto headquarters. Limassol, with its strong Templar commandery, became the new center of their vast international organization. While the loss of the Holy Land was a catastrophic blow to their prestige and primary mission, it did not destroy the order itself. Far from it. The Knights Templar were more than just soldiers. They were the architects of Europe's first multinational corporation. For nearly 2 centuries, they had been building an unparalleled network of financial and logistical power. They owned immense tracts of land across Europe, from farms in England to vineyards in France. They operated fleets of ships, controlled trade routes, and most importantly, they had pioneered international banking. A pilgrim in London could deposit his money at the London Temple and receive a letter of credit, which he could then cash at any Templar preceptory on his journey to the Holy Land. A revolutionary concept that made them indispensable to kings and commoners alike. Now, without a war to fight in the East, this financial machinery became their dominant feature. From their base in Cyprus, the Templars managed their sprawling European assets. They were no longer just warrior monks. They were landlords, bankers, and diplomats. The new Grandmaster, Jacques de Molay, a veteran of the fighting at Acre, was consumed with the idea of launching a new crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. He engaged in diplomacy with European monarchs and even the Mongol Ilkhanate, seeking alliances for a grand offensive. But the crusading spirit in Europe had waned. Kings were more interested in fighting each other than in distant holy wars. The Templars maintained a military presence, launching occasional raids on the Egyptian and Syrian coasts. But these were minor actions, not the great war of reconquest de Molay dreamed of. Their new role was fraught with peril. An immensely wealthy and powerful military order with no active war to justify its existence became an object of suspicion and envy. They were a supranational entity, a state within many states, answering only to a distant pope. Their immense wealth, once seen as a necessary tool for defending Christendom, was now viewed by indebted monarchs as a tempting and vulnerable prize. Across the sea, in the heart of Europe, a king sat on the French throne, who would seal the Templars' fate. He was Philip IV, known to history as Philip the Fair for his handsome appearance, not his character. Philip was a new breed of monarch, cold, calculating, ruthlessly efficient, and possessed of an almost fanatical belief in the divine authority of the French crown. His ambition was singular: to forge France into a centralized, all-powerful state, with himself as its absolute master. But this ambition was incredibly expensive. Philip's reign was a history of constant, draining warfare against England and Flanders. To fund these conflicts, he needed money, and he was perpetually, desperately short of it. His methods for raising capital were brutal and systematic. He debased the currency, repeatedly reducing the amount of silver in the coins, while demanding taxes be paid in the old, higher standard. He expelled the Jews from France in 1306, seizing all their property and assets. He did the same to the Lombard bankers, another group of international financiers. Each time, the royal treasury saw a temporary influx of cash, but it was never enough. And throughout these financial struggles, one institution stood as a silent, powerful creditor, the Knights Templar. The Paris Temple was not just the Order's French headquarters. It was the unofficial treasury of France. Its vaults were more secure than the king's own, and Philip, like his predecessors, used the Templars as his personal bankers. He deposited state funds with them, and more importantly, he borrowed from them heavily. By the early 14th century, the King of France, the most powerful monarch in Christendom, was deeply in debt to a military order quartered in his own capital. This presented Philip with an intolerable situation. The Templars were an obstacle to his vision of absolute power. They were an international organization, immune to royal taxes and loyal only to the Pope. They held his debts, and they were fabulously, unimaginably wealthy. To a king like Philip, who had already plundered the Jews and the Lombards, the Templars must have looked like the ultimate prize. Eliminating them would not only clear his enormous debts at a stroke, but would also allow him to seize their vast assets, refilling his depleted coffers and removing a powerful rival in one swift, audacious move. He just needed a justification, a pretext so shocking that it would paralyze any opposition. Motive and opportunity were not enough. King Philip needed a weapon. That weapon would be propaganda, wielded by his ruthless chief minister, Guillaume de Nogaret. Nogaret was a man forged in the crucible of royal service, a lawyer whose loyalty to the state surpassed any moral or religious scruple. He had previously orchestrated the kidnapping of Pope Boniface VIII, and he was the perfect instrument for Philip's designs against the Templars. The campaign began not with swords, but with whispers. Rumors, carefully crafted and seeded by royal agents, started to circulate. The source of these stories was allegedly a man named Esquier de Floiran, a disgruntled former Templar who claimed to have knowledge of terrible secrets within the order. Whether he was a genuine informant or a pawn in Nogaret's game is debatable, but his testimony provided the lurid details Philip needed. The accusations were designed for maximum shock value, striking at the very heart of the Templars' identity as holy warriors. It was claimed that during their secret initiation ceremonies, new recruits were forced to deny Jesus Christ and spit, trample, or urinate on a crucifix. They were accused of worshiping a demonic idol, a mysterious bearded head known as Baphomet. The charges included institutionalized homosexuality, or obscene kisses, as the indictments would later put it. And of course, there were accusations of financial corruption and greed, a charge designed to resonate with a populace that already viewed the order's wealth with suspicion. The secrecy that had always shrouded the Templars' internal rituals, once a source of their mystique, now became their greatest vulnerability. Because no one outside the order knew what truly happened behind closed doors, it was easy to fill that void with the most sinister of fabrications. The Templars' loss of purpose after the fall of Acre also made them an easy target. The public began to ask, what was the point of this immensely powerful and secretive order now that the Holy Land was lost? Nogaret's campaign masterfully exploited this sentiment, painting the Templars not as heroes of a bygone era, but as a corrupt, heretical cabal plotting in the shadows. The whispers grew into a low roar, poisoning public opinion and laying the moral groundwork for the king's attack. The stage was being set for a coordinated kingdom-wide strike that would be unprecedented in its speed and brutality. Across the Kingdom of France, the pre-dawn hours of Friday, October 13th, 1307, were still and cold. An autumn chill hung in the air, but it was a different kind of cold that was about to descend upon the Knights Templar. For months, King Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, had been meticulously planning this moment with his chief minister, Guillaume de Nogaret. Sealed orders, dispatched weeks earlier to royal seneschals and bailiffs throughout the realm, carried a chillingly simple instruction: do not open until the appointed day. As the first light broke, the seals were broken, and the full, shocking scope of the king's ambition was unleashed. In a stunningly coordinated operation, royal agents moved simultaneously against every Templar preceptory, farm, and administrative center in France. Knights who had gone to sleep as revered members of Christendom's most elite fighting force were woken by the pounding of fists on their doors. They were dragged from their beds, disarmed, and placed in chains before they could fully comprehend what was happening. The charges, read aloud from the royal warrants, were designed to inspire maximum horror and revulsion. The Templars, the heroes of the Crusades, were accused of heresy, of denying Jesus Christ and spitting upon the crucifix during their secret initiation rites. They were charged with idolatry, accused of worshipping a demonic head known as Baphomet. And they were accused of institutionalized sodomy and obscene ritualistic kisses. The shock was absolute. This was an order that answered only to the Pope, a sovereign power within the state. Yet, here they were, being arrested by the agents of a king to whom they owed no direct allegiance. The precision of the raid was terrifying, a testament to the growing power of the centralized French monarchy. Philip's motives were a cold fusion of piety, paranoia, and overwhelming greed. The Templar Order was fabulously wealthy, and Philip's kingdom was perpetually on the verge of bankruptcy. By destroying the Templars, he could not only erase his significant debts to them, but also seize their vast assets. This single, brutal act of state power marked the beginning of the end for the Knights Templar, turning an ordinary Friday into a day that would be synonymous with bad luck and betrayal for centuries to come. Once the chains were fastened, the physical ordeal for the Knights Templar was only just beginning. Philip IV understood that to legitimize his audacious power grab, he needed more than just accusations. He needed confessions. He turned to the fearsome apparatus of the Inquisition, but with a crucial twist. While nominally under papal authority, the inquisitors in France were largely tools of the crown, working hand in glove with the king's secular officials. The knights were thrown into dark, squalid dungeons, isolated from one another to break their spirit and unity. Then, the interrogations began. The methods employed were brutal and systematic, designed to shatter the will of even the most battle-hardened warrior. The strappado was a common technique, where a prisoner's hands were tied behind their back and they were hoisted into the air by their wrists, dislocating their shoulders. Another favored method involved smearing a knight's feet with grease and slowly roasting them over a fire. Sleep deprivation, starvation, and psychological torment were constant companions to the physical abuse. Under such relentless agony, men began to break. The inquisitors presented them with a simple choice: confess to the prepared list of heresies and receive absolution from the church, or maintain innocence and suffer ever-escalating torment as an unrepentant heretic. Faced with unimaginable pain, many chose to confess. A chilling uniformity emerged in their testimonies. Knight after knight admitted to denying Christ, spitting on the cross, and engaging in obscene kisses. Some even described the worship of the idol Baphomet, giving detailed descriptions that seemed to corroborate one another, a clear product of leading questions and shared torture-induced scripts. In Paris alone, 36 Templars died during their interrogation. Pope Clement IV, a Frenchman heavily influenced by Philip, was initially outraged by the arrests, but found himself cornered. The sheer volume of confessions extracted under duress gave Philip the leverage he needed. The Pope eventually sanctioned the trials, issuing a papal bull that ordered all Christian monarchs to arrest the Templars in their own lands. However, the results elsewhere were starkly different. In England, where torture was not initially used, most Templars were found innocent. The confessions, it seemed, were a uniquely French phenomenon, born not of guilt, but of state-sponsored terror. For 7 long years, Jacques de Molay, the 23rd and final Grand Master of the Knights Templar, languished in a Parisian prison. An old man, likely in his 60s, he had endured the initial shock of the arrests and the agony of interrogation. Like many of his brothers, he had confessed under torture, admitting to the order's alleged crimes in the hope of saving it from complete destruction. His confession, however, only served to legitimize Philip's campaign. His spirit, it seemed, was broken. On March 18, 1314, the final act of this tragedy was set to play out. De Molay and 3 other Templar dignitaries, including Geoffrey de Charnay, were led onto a scaffold erected in front of the Grand Cathedral of Notre Dame. A crowd had gathered to witness the final verdict. The papal legates, acting on behalf of the Pope, were to sentence the men to perpetual imprisonment as a supposed act of mercy. The cardinals read the charges and the Grand Master's own confession aloud for all of Paris to hear. But as they pronounced the sentence, something within Jacques de Molay snapped. The years of humiliation, the betrayal of his order, and the weight of his false confession culminated in a final, spectacular act of defiance. To the utter astonishment of the crowd and the cardinals, de Molay found his voice. He declared loudly and clearly that his confession had been a lie, forced from him through the pain of torture. He proclaimed the Knights Templar to be holy, just, and innocent of all the vile accusations laid against them. He shouted that he was guilty only of betraying his order to save his own life, a sin for which he was now ready to die. Geoffrey de Charnay immediately joined him, also recanting his confession. The scene descended into chaos. The cardinals were stunned, their carefully staged trial now in ruins. King Philip IV, who was present, was enraged. This public recantation was a direct challenge to his authority and the entire legal basis for his destruction of the order. He wasted no time. Declaring the men to be relapsed heretics, he bypassed any further church trial and ordered them to be executed immediately. That very evening, as dusk fell over Paris, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charnay were taken to a small island in the Seine, the Île aux Juifs. There, they were bound to the stake and slowly burned to death over a low fire, a method designed to prolong their suffering. In his final moments, defiant to the last, de Molay reportedly uttered a curse, summoning both King Philip and Pope Clement to join him before God's judgment within a year. Whether Jacques de Molay truly uttered a curse from the flames, or if it was a legend born later, the events that followed were shockingly precise. The first to die was Pope Clement V. Just over a month after de Molay's execution, he succumbed to a nasty illness. Later that year, King Philip IV, the Iron Monarch of France, was thrown from his horse during a hunt and died from the resulting injuries. Within a year of the Grand Master's death, his two great persecutors were gone. This startling fulfillment of the curse was the first seed from which the vast forest of Templar mythology would grow. With its leadership executed and its members scattered, the order was officially dissolved by Pope Clement at the Council of Vienne in 1312. Their immense wealth and property were ordered to be transferred to their rivals, the Knights Hospitaller. In reality, Philip and other monarchs seized a significant portion for themselves, achieving their primary financial goal. But the Templars did not simply vanish. Their sudden, violent suppression created a vacuum in the European imagination. How could an order so powerful, so secretive, and so wealthy be wiped out overnight? The answer for many was that it wasn't. Legends began to circulate about a surviving fleet of Templar ships that had escaped from La Rochelle, carrying their fabled treasure. This treasure was imagined to be not just gold and silver, but something far more profound. Sacred relics, like the Holy Grail or the Shroud of Turin, or perhaps even secret knowledge that threatened the foundations of the Church. Over the centuries, this narrative of survival and secrecy proved irresistible. In the 18th century, the burgeoning movement of Freemasonry began to incorporate Templar rites and symbols, with some lodges claiming a direct, unbroken lineage back to de Molay's order. The Knights Templar were transformed from historical victims of royal greed into the secret guardians of ancient wisdom. Their story became a cornerstone for countless conspiracy theories, novels, and films, forever intertwining their historical reality with a mythology of hidden power and enduring mystery. The line between the warrior monks who died in Paris and the fictional heroes who guard the Grail has blurred, ensuring that the Knights Templar, long after their destruction, would achieve a kind of immortality their enemies never intended.